Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What a fine day today. Yeah. Actually, this class has an extensive coverage. I try every effort to make it in order, but I'm afraid if the dealing might be ossified in some gaps against. So I try to expose you principally the basics of dealings about a legal history, a comparative law. And also, for this class, I've prepared two pictures. The projection now shows trademark Inns of Court, which is training and education institute in Great Britain. It is a basin which devoted to produce professionals and jurists in Great Britain. It has a long tradition. Actually, the institution does not offer an academic degree. It is as short as in Korea, which is the Judicial Institute of Training and Research, which is now reformed to model after new law education modality. And the institution is prestigious, but nowadays it is subject to public criticism. Views, opinions, and suggestions were extensively launched to reform this institution. The controversy about this institution is also related with the kind of many problems about the legal profession, surely. So we have taken this problem later, shortly, of course, in context of legal education and legal profession. Actually, it is unique to have two levels of a profession in Great Britain. The groups of barristers or solicitors, they are grounded on some historical background to progeny, to procreate the kind of a two circles of profession. And also, there are preserved some of an unabridged tradition, for example, House of Lords and House of Commons. A bicameralism in the legislature certainly never less usual across the global jurisdictions, but the unique feature in Great Britain may lie in some heuristic basis. So that kind of a context operates to make it a distinct from other nations of bicameralism. So the House of Lords is relatively weak in power, and most of the practical decisions are predominantly engineered by House of Lords, and final authority also traced back to a House of Commons. so which is principally responsible for their political decision for that reason. And another picture leads you to the portrait of Lord Denning. So he wear a gown and sit in a traditional fashion. We once discussed about a revival of a court dress in Korea also. How do you agree if they are so traditional? Of course, they symbolize the integrity and a prestige of a judicial people, and also may enhance the assertive nature of decision. We respect the law. Rule is, as we have learned, a basic conception in democratic governance. So this tradition was intensified in creation of the United States. So one commentator, so the United States is the nation of law, while France is the nation of king. Do you agree? And also, we expect to be in depth in much extent to the works of Lord Denning. He served as a Supreme Court justice, but also have contributed very much to academic materials. So a precious sources of a debate and discussion viewpoints will come from Lord Denning. So for the reason, I've uploaded this picture. It is a little exquisite, do you agree? It's a big, incredible, occupies the whole page. So we are interested to see many of the institutions and practices of United Kingdom, which is available in pristine form, unaffected and uninfluenced form. So it is a great place and tradition that we deliberate on the original ideas of a creation. So in this class, I have arranged in order the subsections we have to focus. So for the British government, I've chosen two writings, which is accepted and brief, from Professor Yardley and also Lord Denning, the title Introduction to British Constitutional Law, also featured in 1984, and What Next in the Law, from a Lord Denning. We have two forms of a Congressional Party, what are called the House of Commons and House of Lords. Then we will surface on topic concerning a Prime Minister and Sovereign. The topic was delivered based on a T.C. Hartley and J.H. Griffiths. The article is named Government and Law. We also see some thought about the English Constitution, which is a classic and presented by Burchard. And if we are each on time, then we might have opportunity to brief on the judicial structure. So, in the 22nd century, prior to the revolution of 1688, the English king exercised extensive power by use of the royal prerogative. The very existence of Parliament was challenged by the king. But after the revolution, the Act of Settlement, 1700, confirmed Parliament as the central lawmaking authority. The contemporary parliamentary authority includes a direct enactment of legislation and delegation of power to ministers to adopt provisional orders and regulations. So both the revolution of 1688 and the Act of Settlement 1700 are actual cardinal in understanding the British democracy. There is little separation of legislative and executive institutions. The two are so closely identified that the Prime Minister survives only while retaining the favor of Parliament. Convention dictates that a vote of censure by Parliament of a Prime Minister's actions or the failure of the government to promote successfully a major bill will precipitate a call for the dissolution of a Parliament and new elections. So history is actually important in constitutional practices of Great Britain. So many key aspects, points of a controversy have been resolved in tradition and history. But the evolution of a tradition is so meaningful and have significance. The system does not support an executive and House of Commons majority from opposing parties. The mutual dependence of the Prime Minister and the Commons should not suggest the fusion of two. A philosophical policy schism often evolves after the Prime Minister is appointed. Additionally, the Prime Minister possesses a considerable power in directing the executive branch free from a direct Parliament control. So as you later see in the practice in two major parties now in governance of a United Britain actually is also based on the traditions of a practice. There are no definite words to dictate or command. Some settled practices are operating to choose the Prime Minister, and also the processes were governed in the context. However, interrelated maybe executive and the House of Commons, there is a clear separation between the judiciary and the executive parliament linkage. Judicial appointments, other than the unique role of Lord Chancellor, illustrate an absence of political patronage. The immutable requirement for judicial appointment, long and a successful career as a barrister, has resulted in a judiciary nearly devoid of politicians. The English judiciary has evolved from its own highly separation sectarian source, preserving a clear detachment from the executive parliament. However, parochial are the internal constraints within the institution of the bar itself. So how does the United States separation of powers differ from the English system? Yardley suggests the United system is an extreme example. So actually, your forestry urged to acquiesce with some fusion of core system, which might be confused in some cases, actually, and the decentralized decentralized form of a court authority was introduced to your learning. So it is unique and also offers a point of meditation if we have a late enactment of judicature. It is, as you know, the longest history of a democracy in Great Britain and uninterrupted. But the court reform paradoxically came later than the United States. So there's no point of a fundamental turmoil or a restructuring at work to shape the nation in whole fashion. So that offers some point of distinction between the United States and Great Britain. The Constitution of the United States of America, which came into effect on 4th March 1789, provides us with the most extreme example of practical separation of three fundamental powers. So the Judicature Act of the United States came earlier than United Kingdom in the early of the 19th century. And the act actually is the subject to be argued, seriously argued and debated through the legitimacy of constitutional review. In Marble versus case, the issue arose from the context of Judicature Act. Do they have power to exercise the competence or jurisdiction of constitutional review, and also the present renege on delivery of appointment is actually a constitutional or unconstitutional. The scope of issues revolve around the Judicature Act, actually. So it is based upon a mistaken interpretation by a French writer, Montesquieu, of the position in England in the 18th century. Though it should be added that the founding fathers were interested in Montesquieu's views as applied to America. And they were in no way concerned about whether or not he had interpreted the English Constitution of his time accurately. The first three articles of the United States Constitution vest federalist powers in Congress, the executive power in the President, and the judicial power in the Supreme Court of the United States. These powers appear to have been intended for the most part to be mutually exclusive, so that no member of one branch of government may be a member of either of the others as well. But even so, the separation was not complete. And various checks and balances between the three agencies were provided. The system in the United States had just been described as a separation of powers modified by checks and balances. Turning to the United Kingdom, it is clear that the three fundamental powers exist, just as they exist in other countries. The rest of power is vested in Parliament, the executive power in the Crown, and the judicial power in the courts of law. It has become apparent that there is much overlapping between them and between the authorities in which the powers are vested. This is therefore the place at which to summarize the principal factors which in the United Kingdom render it impossible to insist that any strict separation of powers exists. Members of government are usually members of one or other of the House of Parliament because it is desirable that all ministers of Crown should be held responsible to Parliament for the actions. This is not an absolute law, as may be seen from the case of Sir Frank Sawkes, who was defeated in his constituency at the 1950 general election, but nevertheless retained his ministerial position as Attorney General, being elected to the Commons by election when another member of the Labour Party stood down from his own seat. Or Mr. Gordon Walker, who became a foreign secretary in the Labour government, which came to power in 1964, despite his own defeat at the general election of that year, and who only resigned the office after his defeat at a later by-election. Probably, a member of the government may retain his office, providing it does not cease to be a member of one of the House of Parliament for more than a few months. It is, however, more usual for any minister who takes office without possessing a seat in either house to be created a peer so that he may sit in the laws. It may be noted that one of the most useful methods of checking up on the activities of ministers or of the government as a whole is the parliamentary question. There is no such parallel possibility in the United States, where members of government do not sit in Congress, and there is no question time. The concept of ministerial responsibility to Parliament has been copied in the constitutions of most independent communist countries. So we have a statement, usually guiding our understanding, that the forms of a British government are actually a fusion among the branches of government. So there are no principles or rules to separate their status in person concerning the public office. They may serve the Congress and also work in the executive branch. And they share both positions. And importantly, it is mandatory in nature. So without the membership of Congress, they could not act in the United States. So the nature of integration among the government branches as prongs and a command of a constitutional practices. That is not the case in the presidential system usually. Of course, that is basic and some major mainstream of a practices. So the mixed form of a progenies may be produced. And in the context, we have a recent case or controversy about such practices in a presidential system. Actually, the public sentiment now requires them to be separated. We detest to have both positions simultaneously. That is for many reasons, but particularly the ethics of government and some corruptive practices lie in a principal cause for the concern and sensibilities. And As introduced, the view of Montesquieu was influential to shape the framework of a United States government. There are many reasons for that deliberation. Principal reason may be found in there is no king in the United States. So they have no way but to adopt the presidential system, actually. Both two countries were actively engaged in a French-Indian War previously before the War of Independence, and later the theater was developed into that war. And in that process, there was a intense hostility between two states, and actually the leaders of a colony were from a British origin, and some of figures may have affiliation with the Franks also. And in the last decisive battle, the Franks provided a military aid to ensure to block the British Navy. So that is one point of event to deter the British dominance over the state of Burgundy. And so the kind of international politics may have some influence over the course of new dealings in terms of constitution and the structure of government in creating the constitution document. And many other reasons may also be posed, but actually the basic philosophy be derived from the Enlightenment tradition. And as I mentioned, the tradition of Magna Carta, particularly the British influence was strong, actually, since the pilgrimage was initiated, and the settlers of Eastern Coast in the United States actually predominantly occupied by British populace. So, and second, the monarch who has the government also in effect forms the third house of parliament. Both this point and the last one lead to the common uses of parliament and government as an interchange of terms, although such a practice is of course incorrect. It will be recalled that the government, through its parliamentary majority, holds the whip hand in the House of Commons, and thus can usually force legislation through that House, and ultimately through Parliament as a whole. On that point, the monarch is the fountain of justice, being technically present in all his courts of law, responsible for many judicial appointments, and exercising the prerogative of mercy in respect to persons convicted in the court. Thus, it plays a part in all three of the fundamental powers. And fourth, a parliament is strictly called the High Courts of Parliament. And although the House of Commons carries out no judicial functions today, the House of Lords is still the ultimate court of appeal. The Lords of Appeal in ordinary sit in the House of Lords, both as a legislative body and as a court. And they are also private councillors, as is in the Speaker of the House of Commons. The Lord Chancellor also plays a part in all three powers, being a member of the House of Lords, as a legislative body, and as a court responsible for a number of judicial appointments, and also a member of the government. Fifth, although the independence of judiciary in practice jealously preserved, superior judges are appointed by the Crown or by the Lord of Chancellor and are removable by the Crown. on an address by both houses of parliament to the crown, while inferior judges are appointed and removable by the Lord Chancellor. On the point 6, the power to make delegated legislation is usually vested by Act of Parliament in the government. 7th, administrative tribunals, as well as many of the ordinary courts of law, are created either directly by Act of Parliament or by delegated powers conferred upon ministers by statute. The powers and duties may be also both judicial and administrative. So you can see the strict sense of a separate powers are less practiced, and they're basically, but actually Montesquieu's viewpoint have focused on a judicial profession in the Great Britain. So how do you perceive between the role and responsibility of judiciary and administration? Actually, we could not give a definite answer about the question. So the British tradition still preserves some kind of a centralized power system in this exclusive preserve of a controversy. Usually, we see the British approach as in the context of a decentralized tradition. But in central powers, the tendency to be integrated in terms of a national power. On the point of 8, justices of peace are primary judges, but still retain certain administrative duties, such as licensing. So you can imagine the kind of a British national government as likely as an indecent bird, which is fused among each other, and they condensed into one mighty foundation. Actually, symbolically, it can be recalled back to a monarch, and they now maintain in a symbolic context. And on point 9, local government powers are created by Parliament or by Royal Charter and are both legislative and executive within the district of each local authority. Enough has been said to show the interrelation between the three fundamental powers. But conceptually, we recognize the three powers. In practice, they are interlinked in the extent of very intense form to be finalized in some basic of a state power. It is very probable that the overlapping of powers and authorities ensures against arbitrariness. It may be added, finally, that all the powerful position of Parliament makes it possible for the legislature to make any alteration in the present system, which is made we see by simple act of Parliament. This is not only the method of passing ordinary legislation in the United Kingdom, but it is the procedure for effecting any constitutional amendment whatsoever. So the tripartite system was realized in the United States. As you read to meditate, the French system also not exactly be classed as one of a tripartite form of government. The judiciary actually was persecuted seriously across the events of revolution. and they are forced to rest in silence. So the political or parliamentary control is more preeminent. So it is a paradox of history, actually. Yep. So, the comments on separating powers from prophecy may suggest the separation in England is less extensive or excessive than in the United States. But there is one area in which the powers of one branch may not be trespassed upon by another. That is sovereignty of Parliament. English courts are unable to rule invalid a parliamentary enactment which will receive the assent of the Crown. A parliament may do what it wishes, except perhaps in one case. It may not bind itself regarding its future decisions. Just as one might challenge some early decisions of the United States Supreme Court, which established principles of judicial review as being inconsistent with views of the founders of the nation. There is similar evidence that the English position might have developed differently. So we now have two cases of presence across the three original states about a democracy. The United Kingdom now still manages a sovereign system as a symbolic monarchy. Two countries have overhauled the system monarch, and the United States elected a president, kind of alternative king, but commanded to execute his responsibility on equal powers among three branches. So check and balance is open. And in France, they've overhauled monarch, but instead elect a most strong presidency. But, yeah, okay, it's fine, and you may leave, but before you leave, I'd like to put this class in order, so let me check your name. 양재은, 박민서, 이경희, 정우일, 조동현, 오대근, 오지수, 임승일. 오케이. But recently, the Constitution of France was reformed to shorten the term of a presidency. Previously, it has a term of 7 years, I guess, but now it became 5 years. Then, what next in the law? You must remember that the party which has obtained the greatest number of seats at an election can enact any legislation in election. It failed to show the pertinent part. I'm sorry. So this delivery was based on Lord Denning. What next in the law? Is there a remedy? Nearly 400 years ago, Lord Coke said that when an act of parliament is against the right and reason, or repugnant or impossible to perform, the common law will control it and adjudge the act to be void. This sapling planted by Lord Coke failed to grow in England. It withered and died. But it grew into a strong tree in the United States in 1706, and by Parliament of Great Britain in favor of the new Parliament of the United Kingdom in 18 are equally unhelpful for this reason. Now, to final and rather curious situation, which also raises questions of sovereignty of Parliament, the English Parliament is sovereign in England, whereas Northern Ireland and one was saying also in Scotland. But this last was challenged in the well-known royal numerals case, the McCormick versus Royal Advocate. Queen Elizabeth I was the first queen in England to use that name. But she was not a queen of Scotland. She reigned before the Treaty of Union between England and Scotland was signed in 1707. When Queen Elizabeth in 1952 ascended to the throne and assumed the title Queen Elizabeth II, use of second was disputed because there had never been a Queen Elizabeth I for Scotland. The use of a second, it revokes some of a past event. So the Pope was asked to name him a Francisco II or III, but he denied, and he used the name a Francisco just. That is because there is no Francisco first. The context found in saying. The use of second was authorized by Royal Titles Act of 1953. Was in conflict with Treaty of Union, which declared that any law which was inconsistent with terms of treaty was void. That included any subsequent act of Parliament of England and Scotland. The treaty possessed some special status as an act so important that it was not subject to later alterations by Parliament. The case was before the Court of Session in Edinburgh, but it did not have to answer the question. The petitioner was found to have no standing to sue. The court did suggest, however, that the treaty did not forbid the use of numeral and had the 1953 Act being inconsistent with the treaty. Then the later Act would not have been effective unless approved in Scotland. The questions were left unanswered. Who would speak for the people of Scotland? All of the people through a bow? There was no experience for that form of inquiry. No other challenges have ever been forthcoming. It may be that the European Commission on Human Rights would be the body to give advice on the issue. However, uncertain the issue remains, it seems the Parliament is sovereign in the United Kingdom, with an asterisk needed next to the name of Scotland. So let me see the question notes and also like to present some of them for your reference. First, would it violate your notions of separation of powers to have the President and the Cabinet appear one day each month in a joint session of Congress to answer questions from members of Congress, a parallel to the practice in England and many other nations? What effect on the passage of laws might such a practice have? So, that is not an easy question for the common law students, but we might be relatively easy on this question. We have a opportunity on a final arbitration of various governmental practices. So, actually, I can see you're told of two distinct forms of a governmental structure, a parliamentary system and presidential system, and the point of essence were available to support your awareness in this area. On the point I said, were the United States to join the European community, how different from that in England, or the entry process be regard to the role of the executive, legislative, and judicial institutions? So, in analogy, we may see the European community or a European Union is kind of a federal institution in this question. Among United States membership in the EEC, what would be the effect of an act passed by Congress which did not specifically withdraw the United States from the EEC, but which was clearly in conflict with provisions of the Rome Treaty? This is pertinent or proper for the United States to join the European community. If we are administrator, we may have points of a deliberation about the size of a territory and the populace, what else. How do you agree if the size of a Korean territory is proper to be shielded in the context of national management? We have 50 states in the United States. What does it have any implications? The United States is proper to join the European community. Have you ever been experienced of a Francophonia or a communist nations? Its territory, in hypothesis, not practically operable, but bigger than the United States. 3 times bigger than you. Do you think it is more proper to join a communist nations or Euro-Francophonia? I'm not sure. On the point of force, has the European Court at Strasbourg become a quasi-constitutional court for England? And actually, we'll later have a brief about the hierarchy between the two systems. In domestic context in England, actually are struggling to some extent, not absolute or a predominant, but to be resilient against the rule of a European court. Where would you place in the judicial hierarchy? On other point, 5 minds have long debated the extent of the authority of the English Parliament. Do you agree that the only thing Parliament cannot do is act so as to bind itself in the future? Isn't the sovereignty of Parliament limited by the affirmative actions that are taken subsequent to decisions of the European Court at Strasbourg? Could the United States Congress bind itself in the future? Why does the issue appear more important in the English legal system? So that is hypothetical, but maybe helpful to analyze the context and practices. And we turn to explore a parliament in twofold branches, including the House of Commons and House of Lords. Legislation is adopted by the House of Commons, considered by the House of Lords, and given a royal assent by the sovereign. Thus, it is important to include the sovereign within the definition of parliament as a whole. But royal assent must be given. The sovereign really has no choice. The assent is required by convention that has endured since 1640. And the legislative role of House of Lords has diminished in this century. Legislative power thus is formally lodged in the House of Commons or lower house. But even the Commons is subject to control by the Cabinet, where the most effective base of power exists. Lack of true bicameral legislature has generated recent discussion of parliamentary reform, directly larger to increasing the power of the House of Lords. So the power base is an enchanting word for political theorists. Usually, they saw the political power in some of unitary, focused fashion. They are not friendly with separation of powers. So it is likely against a institutionalist or a legal sociologist. The principal function of the House of Commons, and indeed the Parliament as a whole, is to enact laws for the overall benefit of the nation. No one should deny that the lawmaking function of the House of Commons is of considerable importance. We sometimes say it had a bad year, that a few needed laws were passed, or that it had a good year, the needed laws were enacted. So, according to the version, it is more proper to see the Chinese leader's words. Mao Zedong, power is based on the firing arm. Do you agree? And of course, as later seen, you can see some of a centralized a governance in terms of a communist ideology. The legal institution could be legitimately overwhelmed political power. That is a delicate point, and also raise an interesting inquisitions about through our intelligence. So there is another function that we may tend to overlook, partly because it is related to the different notion of separate powers in England. It is the role of Commons to elect the government. The House of Commons chooses the Prime Minister. We in the United States follow a different route. We created the Electoral College with the idea that it would be composed of some form of most intelligent people in the nation who deliberate at national election and choose the most able leader. But it is an anachronism as an American electoral institution and will likely be abolished at some time in the future, or perhaps only when it functions as to cause national surprise or shock. The House of Commons functions quite differently. Bound to some degree by public opinion, the elected House of Commons nevertheless chooses the nation's leader, and perhaps more importantly, may later choose to reject that leader. It is the rejection power that makes the House stand considerably apart from the American system and causes relations between the chosen Prime Minister and the House of Commons to be, if not cordial, at least frequent. The system tends to result in former prime ministers to lead the nation. But the House of Commons follow closely behind, guiding them when they feel the leaders stray too widely. So practically, the leadership has some significant implications in nation management, and also you can see the supremacy of a UN Security Council, where the present wisdom of humanity created for our this world politics. Veto power, and in the context of a power relations or infrastructure, the veto power may one strand to be seriously considered. For example, the UN Security Council has adopted a veto system, and also in the presidential system, one of a unique point in available to our thought is the veto power of president, who can legitimately reject the resolution of Congress about the bills and other enactment context. A House of Commons members are elected by plurality rather than majority vote. It is commonly referred to as the first past the post process. It allows relative mild changes in voting patterns of principal parties in the electoral districts to result in meaningful changes in the power balance in Commons. The system does provide for the development of rather close ties between members of the House and the constituents. Party loyalty and organization are essential to the survival of the parliamentary or government party. Serious breaches in loyalty may result in a House of Commons vote contrary to the interests of government elected. But such vote would be welcomed by the opposition party, ever prepared to confront the parliamentary party in a new election at a time of the latter's weakness. So there you can find delicacies in practice. Later with the presentation in brief form of our English Constitution, it is a little difficult in your current understanding of law in some cases. So partly because they have relied on practices in terms of a constitutional rule. At the beginning of each parliament, a speaker is elected. He serves as chairman of the House. Sometimes the election is contested, but more often there are pre-election conferences between the parliamentary and opposition party leaders which lead to a unanimous election. The Prime Minister appoints the leader of the House, and the opposition appoints the leader of the opposition. Other members are then selected to be whips, who maintain discipline and urge attendance. And it goes without saying, loyalty in debate and vote of the party members. There is far less independent voting by members than in the United States. Were it to be otherwise, the government's very existence might be threatened. The dissolution of Parliament might follow the government's failure to obtain an affirmative vote on a major proposal. It might also come to an end if there is a vote of censure or particularly a poor opinion polls. If it does not die in a natural death, it will do so by lapsing at 5 years. An extension is permitted only with the concurrence of the House of Lords when there is an emergency. But if the House of Commons decided to enact a statute giving itself extended, could it not do so if it is true sovereign? It did extend its life during the 1935, 45 period, but this was considered an emergency. By convention, a source of law to be discussed in chapter presented to you later, Parliament would not abuse this rule, and when an existence has been decreed, it has been limited also by convention to 1 year at a time. The Prime Minister may choose to dissolve a Parliament not only when the situation is bad, but also when it is especially good, with the hope that the people will vote the party in again and give it a new 5-year lease. Although a parliament is to have a life for 5 years, the custom is to divide it into annual sessions. They sometimes held more frequently, and when a parliament is dissolved for reasons mentioned above, the order division into annual session necessarily will be altered. The Commons does not meet for very long each session, and although the building is impressive, the working conditions are considerably more austere than in the United States. How do you receive his introduction? Actually, you have an impressive scene, the internet sources showing a British Parliament, magnificent, like the Museum of Louvre. But in contrast, you can see a relatively humble picture of Buckingham Palace. What's it? Okay. For this introduction, we have some supplements in viewpoint from Samson, titled "The Changing Anatomy of Britain." Actually, I should have to lose pigeon on the screen. So, what is beautiful? So, let us see. I'll ask 5 more minutes. The small chamber with a floor only 68 feet long still has the atmosphere of drawing room. It is a quarter of size of House of Representatives in Washington, which has few members. The members crowded on the green-led benches, baying, giggling, or sleeping, seem unaware of the public galleries above them. They are not supposed to read their speeches, and the improper debates are much more intimate than the speech flying in Washington or Paris. They dawdle in and out of chamber, bowing to the speaker and whispering to their colleagues, while in the lobbies, bars, and restaurants, they pick up their information and gossip. They can all feel the mood of the House, which no prime minister can altogether ignore. Even Churchill, at the height of his wartime power, remained a good house of a commons man. And during a crisis such as Suez or the Falklands, it is the mood of House which is ruling the nation. So it is evoking our lessons about the demise of a prime minister, Thatcher, former prime minister Thatcher. He is called the Iron Lady, and a strong profile on conservative tradition in British political context. One professor from Seoul SNU, Seoul National University, is an actual expert of a British politics. I do not call the exact name of her. Ji-hyang Park, he also about the biography and political meaning, implications, and the context of as a career covering a Prime Minister, the stature. It seems to be interesting. I like to suggest to read it. Even the architecture is now called in question. The wide rectangle with the rows of members facing each other and the speaker in the middle provides the natural stage for two parts competing on the adversary system, seeing every argument as a contest between prosecution and defense. The heroic encounters between Disraeli and Gladstone, Attlee and Churchill, Thatcher and Foot have become part of Britain's political psychology. Accepting the opposition may get otherwise. So I've curtailed the rest of a story, and if it is available in throughout this term, I'll get you further. So I have to respect the time, and I'll close this class at this point, and we later are required to review the House of Lords and the Prime Ministers and other context of a British government. Okay, thank you for your attendance. See you later.